Now let's take a look at the psychological effect that these alien abductions have on these people. Abductees are not usually physically harmed, but Dr. Mack has documented severe psychological and emotional distress that can persist for decades afterwards. Abductees usually withdraw from society. Now, contactees are abductees, but they're a subset of them. Contactees usually feel chosen by these aliens to proclaim their alien message. So contactees are a little different than abductees. This message is usually one of impending doom, followed by a new age for humanity if we listen to and obey their message. But the overwhelming majority of abductees don't feel that way. They report a sense of dread, humiliation, hopelessness, and fear. These are the ones that suffer psychologically the most. So most of the people who the aliens abduct, it is not good for them. It almost ruins their life. There are very few of these abductees that would be called contactees. Most of them, it really screws them up. But let's take a look at the alien message, particularly among these contactees who receive this message and then tell us what it is. In 1953, an F-89 interceptor jet was scrambled to investigate a UFO over Lake Superior near Kinross Air Force Base. This is in Michigan. Ground radar watched as the UFO merged with the F-89 and then just moved off the scope. The two pilots, the F-89 jet and the UFO, were never seen again. We can only assume that the pilots died. In the 1940s and the 1950s, before we had a space program, these aliens told us things that were just not true. They told us that there was a civilization on Saturn, that it was a subtropical paradise. They said Venus had forests and streams, healthy wheat fields, suburban areas, etc. They even said that the Sun and Mercury aren't hot and that Pluto wasn't cold. They also said that man will never set foot on the moon until we receive and obey their message. They've been ignorant of the Earth's diameter and just basic planetary physics. They have espoused very racist views, particularly against the Jews. They've urged LSD and drug use, and they condone premarital sex. They usually espouse views that are what we would consider either occultish or Eastern religion or very, very liberal theology. They're usually interested in theology, but they never can agree with other aliens. Their definition of God, who they talk a lot about, it's all over the map. But one thing they do agree on is they deny the basic historic Christian doctrines. They said they come from every planet in our solar system. And the really funny thing is, as America's space program began to advance in the 1960s, all of a sudden they didn't come from the planets in our solar system. They started coming from other planets outside of our solar system. That's really interesting. So we found that a lot of these messages we get through the contactees from the aliens are just flat out lies. They're not true. But what is the alien message? Let's take a look at that. Well, it's usually twofold. One of is impending doom, and that is to be followed by a new golden age. This new golden age can be hurried along and the doom can be lessened if we accept their main message. This great cleansing, or what some of us would refer to as Armageddon or Judgment Day, has been revealed to us from the prophets of every religion since the start of our civilization. This is what the aliens are saying. Their message is that space beings hope to guide Earth through this really rough time into this new golden age when all races will shun discrimination, will have a unified world government that will conduct itself on their spiritual principles, and it will permit all people to grow in love and peace. To do this, we've got to realize, according to the aliens, that we're all part of God. We must accept their help to transcend our consciousness to a higher spiritual plane. But before this time of trouble comes, the aliens tell us that many of the enlightened people will be evacuated by the UFOs and saved from this trouble. These raptured people will live on another planet until our time of cleansing is complete. Now, from the 1950s all the way through the mid-70s, their message was this, but it was also that you're not handling atomic power correctly. So they gave us their social message, hey, you're not handling atomic power correctly, and they gave us this spiritual message. Hence, you had movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still. But from the mid-70s to the present, the social message changed. It became our inability to use our environment properly, i.e., ecological disaster, i.e., global warming. And they still had the same spiritual message. So it seems that their message of doom is kind of tailored to whatever our major perceived problem is. In the 50s, 60s, and early part of the 70s, it was nuclear war. From the mid-70s on, it's ecological disaster. You're not handling your planet right. We can't let you go out into the universe if you can't handle your own planet. But the same message has been their spiritual message. Yes, there's going to come a time of doom, but we're going to remove a certain amount of people from that. And as you go through this time, if you listen to our message and accept our teachings, then you'll make it through this time and you'll come into this wonderful new golden age. And then we'll return these people. So once again, please remember, these messages are coming through contactees, not abductees. Abductees are too traumatized to hear or deliver these messages. Now let's talk about a few observations about the aliens' message. One, we must wonder why the alien contact method is the same as that's used by psychics, mediums, and occultists. I have a handout on this that goes into a little more detail on that. Secondly, if they're really highly advanced beings from another star system, why are they fixated on a religious message? Doesn't it seem strange they haven't told us how to cure disease, restore the environment, renew civilization, eliminate poverty, war, pestilence, and social unrest? Go figure. A third thing is, why do some of these aliens actually possess and inhabit some of these contactees just like the demons of old, as in demonic possession? Dr. Valley says this, quote, "The UFO phenomenon represents a manifestation of a reality that transcends our current understanding of physics, which is the UFOs are physical manifestations that cannot be understood apart from their psychic reality. What we see is not an alien invasion, it is a control system which acts on and uses humans." End quote. Wow. For a secular scientist like Dr. Valley to say something like that is incredible. In an official U.S. government document entitled UFOs and Related Subjects, an annotated bibliography by Lynn Cato, it says this, Quote, a large part of the available UFO literature is closely linked with mysticism and the metaphysical. It deals with subjects like mental telepathy, automatic writing, and invisible entities, as well as phenomena like poltergeist manifestations, which are ghosts, basically, and possession, as in demonic possession, end quote. Many of the UFO reports now being published in the popular press recount alleged incidences that are strikingly similar to demonic possession and psychic phenomena, which has long been known to theologians and parapsychologists. And that's the whole quote. That's by Lynn Cato. Joe Jordan, the state director of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, which is a naturalist, skeptic UFO group, states that, quote, the similarity between the abduction experience and demon possession is very, very close, end quote. Dr. Valley says that, quote, to find alien abduction parallels in primitive magic, mythology, and religions, all one has to do is remove your blinders, end quote. A few UFO investigators have suggested to me that there may be a link between UFOs and the occult. This is a further quote from Dr. Valley. At first view, the very suggestion of such a link is disturbing to a scientist. However, the phenomena reported by UFO witnesses involve poltergeist effects, levitation, psychic control, out-of-body experiences, etc., familiar themes in occult literature. I am tempted to accept as a working hypothesis that in times past, contact occurred between humans and these other interdimensional beings, variously described as angelic, demonic, or simply alien, end quote. For a non-Christian secular scientist such as Dr. Valley, that statement is significant, and I mean, I can't tell you how incredible that is for a secular scientist to say. John Keel, an agnostic, says, quote, ufology should rightly be a branch of psychic research, end quote. Dr. Pierre Guernin says, quote, UFO behavior is more akin to magic than to physics as we know it. The modern UFO-nauts and the demons of past days are probably identical, end quote. To a scientific naturalist, the acceptance of interdimensional beings requires the introduction of alternate dimensional realities beyond our 4 dimensions that we currently know. To many naturalists, this is anathema. They don't even want to think about it, because it introduces the very real possibility of interdimensional beings which could possibly be angels, demons, or, God forbid, God. Too many naturalists agree with the late astronomer Carl Sagan when he said the cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. Now, I know that's a famous quote, but Carl Sagan has no way of knowing that. He doesn't know if there are other dimensions or other realities. He's making a big assumption that the 4 dimensions and the physical universe is all there is. There is no way of proving that. That is a huge assumption. We'll see a little more later on. John Keel, remember he's an agnostic, again says, quote, demonology is not just another crackpotology. It is the ancient and scholarly study of the monsters and demons that have seemingly coexisted with man throughout history. Thousands of books have been written on the subject, many of them authored by educated clergymen, scientists, and scholars. And uncounted numbers of well-documented demonic events are readily available to any researcher. The manifestations and occurrences described in this imposing literature are similar, if not entirely identical, to the UFO phenomena itself. Victims of demon mania, which we would call possession, suffer the very same medical and emotional symptoms as the UFO abductees. The devil and his demons can, according to the literature, manifest themselves in almost any form and can physically imitate anything from angels to horrifying monsters with glowing eyes. Strange objects and entities materialize and dematerialize just as UFOs do. UFOs do not seem to exist as tangible manufactured objects. They don't conform to the accepted natural laws of our environment. They seem to be nothing more than transmogrifications tailoring themselves to our ability to understand. The thousands of contacts with these entities indicate that they are liars. The UFO manifestations seem to be, by and large, merely minor variations of the age-old demonological phenomena. The earth is not inhabited, it's infested, end quote. I have a note on this on 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 14 and 15, and you might want to look at that. It basically says that Satan and his demons can manifest themselves as angels of light. So you can think you're seeing a real angel or somebody from God, and you may not be at all. Captain Ivor McKay, the former chairman of BUFORA, the British UFO Research Association, that is also a naturalist or a skeptic organization. He takes this view also. He claims the following similarities. 1, extremely foul odors are associated with both seance rooms, haunted locations, and UFO sightings. Abductees report this bad smell. 2, there is an aversion to strong light in both seance rooms, haunted locations, and UFOs. 3, there's a sudden decrease in temperature that's associated with UFOs and occult occurrences like seances and ghostly encounters. 4, the entities seem to be shadowy, transparent, semi-solid figures. They're more like apparitions than real characters or creatures that you can touch and feel. 5, mentally detected voices are heard in both UFO and occult context. The contactees claiming that they represent communication with extraterrestrials are much like the occultists who claim that they have contact with these various spirits. And 6, I've listed a whole list of comparisons, and you can see that on the handout. Dr. Mack says a few things. 1, something definitely happened to these abductees. They didn't just dream this. 2, he believes, based on all the available information, that these are interdimensional beings. He also believes the primary agenda of these beings is to warn us of some impending doom. And he also believes that abductees often take tremendous religious and prophetic significance from these experiences, even though it adversely affects usually their entire life. Before we get into this, one other small thing. It's interesting to kind of sum up all this together, and we see that the UFO message has often been lies. It's often changed depending on where we're at in our technological development. Like I say, first these aliens said we're from other planets in our solar system. Then they said, when our technology advanced, then they said we're from other parts of the stars. In fact, one interesting thing, and I may talk about this in a few minutes, but some of them have said, well, we're from the Pleiades. Well, okay, we know the Pleiades is a constellation. The interesting thing is we also know that those stars in the Pleiades, some of them are farther away from each other than they are from Earth. So what do you mean you're from the Pleiades? You're talking about it like all those stars are right close together, and they're not. They're so far apart. So a lot of their messages are lies, or they just don't make any logical sense. One other thing that Joe Jordan from MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and he's the state director in Florida, he said he has 400 verifiable cases of abductions being halted when the abductees called on the name of Jesus. Wow, that's really fascinating. He also has said that 3 other UFO researchers have come to him and told him they have come across similar experiences, but they were afraid to publicize them for fear of being ridiculed. Now, almost all of these halted abductions were people who called on Jesus to help them, but they weren't what we would call either long-term or mature Christians. Many of them had said that, yes, they had been Christians, but they were backslidden, or they had been to church just a few times. I've also passed out a sheet that has some Bible references in it to some of these occultic ways of communicating that might be a benefit to you, so I would just ask you to read over those. But now I want to talk about some standard communication approaches of the aliens that are also the same as what we would term the occult. The first thing is levitation. This refers to the phenomena of people who are usually taken aboard an alien spaceship, or if they're sleeping and then they feel their body is just levitated up to the spaceship. An example of this is in a seance when the spiritualist table either can lift off the ground, or the experience of some abductees as to how they were brought into an alien spaceship. So that's one thing that occurs in both what we would call occult things and UFO things. Another is mental telepathy, and that is an altered state of consciousness that enables a person's body to be used by, let's say, a paranormal entity, whether it's either a spirit or an alien, for communication. A spirit guide, just in Christian terms, is a demon. Mental telepathy is consistently used in alien encounters, of close encounters of the 4th, 5th, and 6th kind. Another is automatic handwriting, and that's where a medium or a spiritualist begins to write something down, and they don't really know what they're writing. They're just under the control of this spirit. That also happens when abductees are sometimes taken up to spaceships. Sometimes they will just write things down, or at least that's what they say. Another thing is clairvoyance, and that is mentally seeing physical objects or events at a distance by psychic means. It usually involves the ability to perceive things beyond a physical reality. Sometimes you even see things that are so-called in the future. And that happens in both the abduction cases and in what we would call the occult cases. Another thing is called an out-of-body experience. It's also called astral projection. And that is where people feel their spirit is separated from their body, and their spirit or their soul leaves the body and travels elsewhere. And some contactees have even claimed, we traveled to outer space, we traveled to the alien planet, and we saw wonderful and beautiful things, and this is what awaits us. That also happens a lot in certain forms of yoga and things like that. So another thing is a seance, where it's a meeting where people gather and they attempt to communicate with a medium, through a medium, with the dead. Mediums often use the assistance of a spiritual guide. or Ouija board or automatic handwriting, that sort of thing, sometimes the person's face, the dead person's face, will actually kind of materialize. But again, it looks as, it's like it's semi-transparent. You can kind of see through it. A seventh thing is spiritism or channeling, and that's the attempt to communicate with dead people or extra-human people like aliens through a human medium. The TV shows like Crossing Over with Jonathan Edwards, or even something like The Pet Psychic, that involves channeling. It's interesting when Jonathan Edwards, and I've watched it a few times, he always gives a positive message. A lady will come on and say something like, I treated my husband like dirt when he was alive, but when he died I realized what a great man he was, and I just want to know, does he forgive me? And I really do love him, and I'm sorry I treated him like a schmuck. Never does Jonathan Edwards say, yeah, I'm in contact with your husband, and you're right, he's ticked. You treated him like dirt, and no, he doesn't forgive you. He always gives a positive message like, oh yes, he understands, he forgives you, he realizes you did this because of your upbringing or whatever, and he's just waiting to be with you in eternity when your love can be fulfilled, and it's always a positive message, never a negative message. The Pet Psychic, that kind of goes beyond explaining. Anyway, there are more occultic methods such as astrology, tarot card reading, other things like that. But we should ask ourselves a few questions, like, why do UFOs only use occultic means of communication instead of standard approaches like radio contact or direct physical contact with recognized government leaders? I mean, if they're out there, why don't they beam something to our communications satellites that broadcast it all over the world that says, hey, we're peaceful aliens, we want to interact with you, and we want to know how can we come down to Earth so it won't freak everybody out, and we already have realized what government leaders are in charge of the various countries, and we want to contact you, and as a result, or as a thing of our good intentions, here's the cure for cancer. Why don't they do that? Or why don't they land a UFO on the lawn of the White House and just come out and say, hey, we're here, we're from another planet? Why do they use these occultic methods of communication? Another thing is, aren't the aliens smart enough to realize that these occultic methods would be seen by us as questionable, to say the least? And again, why don't they contact governmental or scientific leaders that have so much influence? Why do they appear to two drunks in Pascagoula, Mississippi, who were on a fishing trip in 1971? Why? Why do they appear to people who have a history of interest in paranormal events, or Eastern religions, or mystic religions, or abductees that come from severely dysfunctional homes, especially where sexual abuse has happened? Why do we get conflicting messages from them? Some of their statements are outright lies, and again, their religious message isn't even the same. Depending on what UFO person contacted you, their messages are all over the map. They're not the same, except in their denunciation of the historic Christian doctrines. And another thing, why a religious message? Why don't you provide us with a medical cure? Or why don't you provide us with some science that could really enhance our life? Or why don't you tell us how to overcome racism? Or why don't you tell us a lot of things that we could use right now that would benefit us? Why this strange religious message? And why do you lie about things? Why do you say, yes, at first we're from Venus, we're from Saturn, and then when we find out these places are very inhospitable to our type of humanoid life. Then you start saying you're from other places like the Pleiades. Come on. We know some of those stars in the Pleiades are farther apart from each other than they are from Earth. And the last thing is, why is their religious message diametrically opposed to Christianity? Okay, so to sum everything up that we've talked about, it appears that some UFOs are real, but they defy many universal physical laws, and they don't act like normal physical flying machines that require fuel, maintenance, and logistical support. They're probably not extraterrestrials. In other words, they're probably not from another planet. They are most likely interdimensional beings. They have proven to be liars and deceivers, and we can't trust what they say. They've gotten many facts wrong. They communicate by what we call occultish means. They just don't act like the intelligent beings that they're supposed to be. They also have a preoccupation with theology and sex, but their theology is all over the map. But the one thing they do agree on is they reject historic Christianity. They also act very much like the demons of the Bible, and even some secular scientists have noted this, and that's amazing. And finally, this would explain much about the second coming of Christ and how the disappearance of millions of believers could be explained away. Now, no discussion about UFOs would be complete without talking about Roswell and Area 51. Roswell. Here's what happened. Rancher Max Brazel came across some wreckage on his boss's farm near Roswell, New Mexico on June 14th, 1947. 10 days later, on June 24th, private pilot Ken Arnold saw 9 flying saucers in the Pacific Northwest, and that's what started the modern UFO era in America. So it was in this atmosphere that Mac Brazel took this wreckage to the local sheriff on the July 4th weekend. They contacted Major Jesse Marcel at the Roswell Army Air Corps office, and that is the precursor to the U.S. Air Force. Marcel's expertise was in making assessments of bomb damage from aerial photographs. He had no experience with advanced weather balloons or radar reflectors or things like that. Here's what the wreckage consisted of: rubber stamps or rubber strips, tin foil, very tough paper, tape with flowers on it, and sticks. Altogether, the wreckage weighed about 5 pounds. There were no spaceships, there were no dead aliens. Major Marcel put out a press release saying that it had been some sort of a flying disc. And that press release was put out on July 8th, 1947. When General Roger Ramey, Marcel's boss in Fort Worth, Texas, heard about this, he had Marcel and the material sent to him for analysis. Ramey called down his weather officer, Irving Newton, to look at it. Now, Newton, excited to see a flying disc, was really disappointed. He immediately recognized it as an advanced weather balloon. Unbeknownst to any of these men, the Army Air Corps had a secret balloon program called Project Mogul. And Project Mogul was to detect Soviet atom bomb explosions using high-altitude recording devices on weather balloons. One of their balloons that went over Roswell was missing. Years later, investigators using the Freedom of Information Act figured out that part of that missing balloon was what Mac Brazel had found. Now, for an in-depth report on this, you can read the 2 handouts that I have that are included in the teaching material. They explain everything in great detail. The other thing is Area 51. This is another UFO conspiracy topic. Area 51 is located at Groom Lake, Nevada. This Air Force base was home to the 509th Bomber Squadron, and that's the squadron that dropped the atom bombs on Japan. It's also the place where they tested very secretive new jets and other technological things, including the stealth aircraft. When reports began to be circulated that they could have an alien spacecraft there, the Air Force was more than happy to let those rumors exist. Why? Because it provided a cover for their secretive programs, although at times it became a real nuisance to them because they had a lot of these UFO conspiracy people crowding around their base. Now that is a closed-off base, but still, it was a nuisance. Area 51, honestly, is the most unsecretive secret base in existence. Everybody knows about it. Congressmen have been there. Other world leaders have been there. The general population isn't there. They can't go there. But you can read the several links that I've provided about Area 51, and that's in the Roswell and Area 51 folder. Suffice it to say that there are no alien spaceships or beings at Area 51. Well, that's about it. I hope I've covered the topic in depth. I think I have. There will also be a lot of references that will be listed in the material in the handouts, and you can check out those things also. I also reference many different books that have been written on the subject, so I hope that covers about everything. Thank you for taking the class. Goodbye.